All right, by my watch, it's 5 o'clock, and what I'd like to do is go ahead and call the January meeting of the Pawleys Island Town Council to order.
Sure, everyone can hear.
Yes,
You need to unmute, I believe.
Hey guys, let me do a quick audio check. Can you all hear me?
yeah.
And we can hear you great.
Okay, very good. Good, excellent.
So I'm calling the meeting to order. What I'd like to ask everybody to do is silence their cell phones at this time, make sure we don't have any interruptions. And the first order of business is public comments, and we've got several people that have signed up. If you can hand me that pad, Gary. And just let everyone know that you've got 3 minutes public comment. This is an opportunity for you to address town council. There's not going to be any questions or back and forth exchange, just heads up on that. So first up, we've got Norm Avenger.
I'm Norm, and this is my wife Carol, and our house is 2 houses north of the South Causeway. The first thing I want to mention to you, and maybe make a request, is with these floods and the high waters that are coming over the roads, that's an issue that everybody knows about. But we've had them higher lately. We had a come over the road with a 5-foot tide the other day. And one of the issues to me is the roads, at least between the north and south causeway, used to be closed. Now they're 18-wheelers, they're service trucks and all kind of vehicles that are going up and down the road, and they don't care how fast they're going and some of the weight that they're making you could serve on. So I'd like to maybe make a request, if there's any way possible, to block those roads off again until the tides go back down, because it's an erosion problem and people have ruined their cars in the water. Now, that was the first thing I wanted to request. And the second is, I understand that DOT is going to repave the roads, whether that's Myrtle Avenue, Atlantic, or the whole island. And to me, that seems like it's a waste, because that's not going to do anything for the issues that we have. And maybe if we could raise the road a foot on some level to minimize the water coming on, if we could put up barriers along the marsh, berms along the shore, something to keep the water off. The town and FEMA and OSHA and everybody else spent millions of dollars putting in the front end on the ocean side to build up the dunes, which is doing a good job. But nobody is doing anything about the backside. And water's coming in, it's getting higher, and there needs to be a plan maybe in some way to keep water off. I understand there's a drain program going, and it may be successful. I hadn't heard much from it lately.
Very much so.
But the problem is, if you're draining water, it's already gotten on there. So the issue is, what can we do to keep the water off the island to start with? And if it keeps on, the property values will go down. We won't have the renters because they can't get on and off the island. We won't be able to enjoy it the same way. So to me, it seems like whether it's a committee, whether it's a council, or somebody ought to be discussing what the long-term issues are and how we can fix it. Like I say, a lot of money was spent on the front side. I think a lot of money has got to be spent on the back side.
That's 3 minutes. If you need another 30 seconds or a minute, you're welcome to it. If you need another 30 seconds or a minute, you're welcome to it. Appreciate your comments. All right, next up, we have Robert Moser.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm aware council's dealing with a lot of dollar issues, and I appreciate your attention to it. We've got upcoming expenditures, as Mr. Avenger pointed out, with a lot of other things, renourishment, everything. We got a lot of dollars that we got to pay attention to. If we had sources for all those dollars identified, and had most of those taken care I can see them taking 50, 60, $100,000 out of the budget to finally achieve the final goal. But I don't think that cutting our police force right now is a good goal or step in that achievement. I think it's something that should be looked at last. I know you can debate, each of us can debate the effectiveness of the police force, what we do, and everything else. But my position is if you live on this island, you are aware of the comfort of the police presence. If they're here, they're riding up and down the beach, they're present, they are a deterrent to crime. And I'm not comfortable that the county is going to fill that void. In fact, they've expressed the fact that they didn't know if they could or not. I want to make sure the council understands that not only the money issues, but the security issues of the island are a responsibility that I think are of utmost importance. And I think the police presence is a big factor in crime deterrent on this island. And I think we need 24-hour coverage.
Thank you, Robert. All right, third and final person I have on the list is Paul Gross. Am I saying that right?
I just signed in.
Oh.
Just here to listen.
Oh,
Thank you very much.
no worries. Thank you. All right, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time. We're going to press on with the meeting agenda. There are some things that were mentioned that I'd like to just make a couple of comments on. I think now's a good time to do it while it's fresh in everybody's minds. Just wanted to clarify, Mr. Avenger, that, and we're not going to have back and forth, I just wanted to offer some of my comments. You mentioned something about the drainage project and that when there's water, if there's water already on the road, addressing the drain issue, the water's already on the road. So if it's already on the road, it's a problem. The drainage project that we've been working on is actually the creek coming up, pushing through the drains before it ever gets over the banks. So when it pushes through the drains, it's causing the other side of the road to flood well before it comes over the bank. So what we're trying to do, and what we have done successfully on both ends of the town hall, is put in backflow preventers to keep that water from pushing back through the drains. And our desire and our goal, once we get some infrastructure funding, is to do the entire island like that. Now, needless to say, that's not going to address the issue of rising tides to the point of 5 foot, it's pretty much going to go over the bank in most places, the lying areas of the island. That is a major project. And I think that's something that we have to address, or at least begin to talk about. And there's FEMA dollars, there's grant money out there. We just got to figure out a way to get it. And I'm going to talk about some of that later on in the meeting.
But the question, does it solve the problem up here?
It solved the problem. It solved the problem with the water coming through the drains, pushing through and flooding before the water comes over the bank. It has been, in my opinion, it's been very successful.
So if you go down there near where your house is, which is not too far from mine, when you got a big flood on the creek, before it ever goes across the road right near the chapel, the water bubbles out right there. It'll flood all that there before it ever comes across the road. So it'll stop that.
And that's what we're trying to fix. So I'm going to close that there. But I hear you. I think we all hear you and we all see it. It's so painfully obvious that we've got an issue and it's only getting worse. So it's something we're going to talk about later in the meeting. And the comments made about the sources for funding, obviously that's a priority. We've got to address that. I think a figure of 60,000, saving of 60,000 was mentioned. I just want to clarify that the first budget that we got before, the first reading was 106, was 572, whatever the number was. It's the budget that we're now proposing tonight is $106,000 less than the original budget. And I would say that no one on town council, at least I am not advocating that by saving this amount of money over 10 years is going to solve our problem. But I do feel like we need to get our house in order because in several years, the underground wire payments will dry up. We're looking at possibly going negative in a budget. So this is an effort to not only clean up our house and get our operating budget in order, but it's a start towards looking at long-term infrastructure funding. And that's another thing I want to talk about later in the meeting as to how we can get bigger dollars. And I've got some ideas on that. So that's all I had. Unless any other council members want to offer comments before we get into the meat of the agenda. Good. All right. Next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from our December 13th regular meeting. A copy of those minutes are in your packets. I'll entertain a motion, or if anyone wants to enter modifications into.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
We have a motion to second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed. What I'd like to do at this time, if it pleases the council, is to shuffle the agenda just a little bit to get Brent into the conversation about item 5A, which is a request for permission to hold fireworks display in Pawleys Island Creek over Labor Day weekend. Brent, I'll turn that over to you because I don't know much about it.
Okay, excellent. Well, yeah, so we're looking to shoot fireworks from a barge located in the creek. That display will be permitted by the state of South Carolina, DNR, and the U.S. Coast Guard. We'll also have to permit the show. We'll work on securing all of those permits. And the show will be shot electronically. And I am here to answer any questions that you all may have regarding that. We shoot about 150 shows here in the state of South Carolina a year. We are the largest pyrotechnic company. And just so this council knows, we have been in business since 2005 and we have never had an accident either. So I want to always let towns know that whenever we come out to shoot a fireworks show, we're very, very particular about how we shoot shows. So safety is of utmost concern. And we have a 100% track record of safety. This show is a bit more complex on the fact that it will be shot from a barge. However, we shoot quite a few shows from barges each year. So we feel very confident that shooting in the creek and Pawleys Island is the best way to shoot this show. There's not a good area in Pawleys Island. It's very congested. So when we shoot fireworks, we do have to have a fallout area. So if as the shells explode, there's obviously fallout that comes back down, burning embers and things of that nature. So we always want to make sure we're away from homes and people, and the creek offers the best opportunity to do that. So we will be positioning the barge in the creek, and we will be blocking both ends of the creek to prevent boats from coming through. We'll be doing that with volunteers and DNR.
Yeah, let me mention something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I brought this up, Brett and I have been talking for several months. I'm Betsy Altman with Pawleys Island Realty. This is our 60th anniversary this year.
60th anniversary of
Pawleys Island Realty.
your company.
Mhm. And so we're doing a little something every month. And a Labor Day weekend traditionally is our thank you to our homeowners. We have our homeowner expo Friday night that coincides with the Civic Association meeting Saturday morning, and then the Civic Association reception after that. So we felt that Labor Day weekend would be a better time to do this than 4th of July. Plus Brent has 70 or 80 shows, I'm sure, 4th of July. He's very busy at that time. He's also done Georgetown, City of Georgetown's fireworks. If you've seen those, Lake Marion, Pawleys Island, Beaufort, Bluffton. He has a great reputation. So he came down a few months ago and we sort of looked at the island. When y'all let us do this for the millennium, we did it off the pier. And that was totally voluntary. I sent letters out to homeowners, we collected the funds, and we had it up clear. Now, as a thank you to our owner, our slogan this year is 60 years of gratitude. So we want to show gratitude to our homeowners, our vacationers, vendors, everybody, and give them something to enjoy during a time what we feel is a homeowner-focused weekend. So we looked to the boat landing at Tom Crocker Boat Landing, and that had a little bit incline and a steeper pitch. And the barge that Brent had, I believe you said it was a 10 by 40 barge. And so
Yes.
Yeah, and so we thought that would be better at the Shell Street boat landing where it's more of a gradual dip into there. And then we would head south and go midway in the creek, sort of up to Lashcott Creek right in there. And then he measured the 350 radius, and then we could have a boat. Now, if I remember correctly, when you set up, he would bring the barge in on Friday. He would set up and they have to have 100 feet radius, nobody near the barge during setup. And then when you're ready to go live, it would be 350 feet when you have active information on there. We were talking about having some 8-foot shells. They're all cardboard shells. So they're biodegradable. There is a little bit of plastic in the sleeve of it, and he can explain the details much better than I. So we were a little concerned about trash in the creek, but most of the cardboard will be biodegradable. I'm not sure, we really haven't talked about a time frame. I don't know when it gets dark at that time. We may or may not have music with it. That's to be determined. We talked about hooking it up with an FM station. We could have some music on our website that at an exact time you push it and then it coincides with the fireworks. That's to be determined. The main thing is to see if y'all allow us to do this in the Pawleys Creek. And I want to give you the breakdown of why we'd like to do it and show our gratitude. So any specific questions, Brent, you can certainly ask. Now, I think we had a rain date of Sunday. If it rained Saturday, you thought it'd be okay to have a rain date for Sunday, if I remember?
Yes, that's correct. If we do get rained out, then we'll have someone stay with the barge at a secured location at a dock. And we'll have to maintain a 100-foot perimeter until the following night. But that would be the plan of action. That's a better plan of action than breaking back down the display.
Questions?
In the permitting process, do property owners in that area, are they notified both on the island and on the creek side?
There are requirements for notifications. In some jurisdictions, Pawleys Island is not one of those. So no, there will not be a notification. However, we can work to get a notification out upon request, but it is not a state requirement.
Okay.
But were we sure it's in the bounds or the boundary of Pawleys Island?
You mean the town of?
Yeah.
So what was the question again, sir?
Are you sure that where you want to put the barge is in the town of Pawleys Island?
From the map that we looked at today, part of it is yes.
Part of, what do you mean part of it is?
Well, I don't know exactly how far your boundary goes on the west side of the creek. I don't know the specific how far you want.
Is your question like who really has jurisdiction?
Yeah, who really has jurisdiction? It seems like
DNR, right?
DNR.
No, DNR would not have jurisdiction. DNR has jurisdiction over waterways in the state of South Carolina, but that doesn't. They wouldn't have jurisdiction over permitting. Permitting is going to be the locals, and it's always the county. And then if it falls within city or town limits, then it becomes the city or the town that permits. So it does matter that gets figured out. We do need to know whether it is the town or if it is the county. If the county, it's a different process, and we're familiar with that process as well.
Brent, I have a question for you. You mentioned about 150 shows. How many of those shows are actually done within tidal marshes in South Carolina?
Let me think about that. So the Port Royal, Beaufort, Renee, what else do we have that are in the tidal marshes of South Carolina? I think so. Port Royal and Beaufort are two that come to mind.
Main ones. Everything else is on the lake.
Yeah. I think in salt marshes, salt marshes, it's those two. Everything else, yes, we shoot from the lakes here in South Carolina.
What about Georgetown, city of Georgetown?
Georgetown is shot from land. It's not shot from a barge. But there is some fallout that does go over a marsh, but it's not shot from a barge.
Who is funding this?
Pawleys Island Realty is paying it all.
Okay.
Can
And
I just ask why you chose to do the marsh rather than off the pier again?
There was complications with the size of the pier. Plus, they would have to block it off from Friday to after the show, and
Yeah, I'm sure, yeah.
I would say that would pass.
Mhm.
How much debris of plastic would you estimate would be residual?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when you look at the makeup of a shell, it is mostly all cardboard. And so there's two Hemis that are put together. Those are cardboard, and then it's like a plastic glue that creates this paper mache that goes around the shell that creates the compression. So when you look at plastic, it's the quick match. It's the igniters that actually that's not correct. It's the part from the igniter down to the gunpowder. It's called quick match, and it's basically cotton infused with gunpowder, and it is encased in tape because it allows the quick match to burn more quickly. It allows you that instant reaction whenever you ignite a shell. There is some of that does not burn. Now you have to keep in mind the plastic is being burned as the quick match burns down. Therefore, there's usually very little left over. Okay, but that plastic still is there, right? It's just melted, so it consolidates. It's smaller. However, this is not a hand-fired shell. This is an electronically fired shell. So the igniters are right on top of the shell. So the E-match or the quick match part of each shell is probably only about 4 to 5 inches in length. Okay, but in a show like this where you're shooting quite a few shells, there is some plastic debris. Okay, it's very, very thin plastic. It's a tape-like material. Most of that debris falls very, very close to the shoot site. So it's not uncommon for us to be able to get most of that debris up from a shoot site. Obviously, this being a barge makes it a little more difficult because depending upon the wind direction, that debris is going to go in that direction. Now, there are some things that we can do with our boat and nets to try to catch a lot of that debris as it comes down right after the show. And those are things that we can work on, but it's not going to be possible for us to get all of that debris.
Yeah.
So what times would you cut off the creek?
Okay, so that's a good question. So we have to maintain a 100-foot radius around the barge at all times as soon as pyro goes on the barge. So we will bring the racks down the day before, put on the barge. At that time, there is no separation distance. We'll start loading that morning, and we have to maintain 100 feet of separation. That's at the dock, that's at the location. Now, at the time of shooting, that 100 feet goes to 350 feet. So to answer your question, we need to start getting boats out of the way 30 minutes ahead of time. And we just can't shoot until everyone's outside of that radius. So the short answer to your question is 30 minutes. We would like to have enough time to make sure we rerun continuity checks and double check things. So we would only need 30 minutes of separation time. So we will not be cutting off navigation on the creek for very long. And as soon as the show's over, we go back to 100 feet again.
So where would the barge actually be sitting when the fireworks were ignited?
Yeah, so we have a map that we can provide to the council for that. We're very flexible with where we place the barge. We need 350 feet of separation. I know we had looked at a couple of different sites. There was a larger pool to the north of the bridge, and then there was an area that was, as I recall, south of the bridge as well. We provided site maps. We can provide that to the council so you can see the areas that we're proposing for shooting the shells. It's very, very close. It's very close to the bridge.
If you go down Shell Street and come south, there's a section right there that's wide before you have the little island and go to Lashkart Creek. Right there is the north end, or they could come and almost sort of go in front of my house and go south of the bridge. There's a lot of space right there, and then you could tie it to my dock the night before or the day or whatever. So whichever one is more.
Can they get the barge to in front of
the North Causeway Bridge?
Okay.
So if you did that, where would people gather to watch? Would it be on a private property?
It could go anywhere. I mean, I think.
My question is, if you did it down there in front of your dock, which I know where that is, or the north end, you still have to consider where people are your customers are gonna view it from.
Well, the shells.
Obviously, the park would be the ideal place because it's public in nature, but.
Well, you can see it. I think when we talked the other day, if I'm not mistaken, Then you say that the shells go up 400 to 500 feet, and then you have the breaking point, and then it goes out about 350 feet. So you're gonna see this from
Definitely
this
not
group,
jurisdiction.
you're gonna see this from Debbie Do.
I've got on my computer, I can't, I'm not there.
Correct. So the largest shells that we're permitting are 5-inch shells. They will go up approximately 500 feet and then break. They have a 350 feet radius, depending upon the shell type, right? But within that,
I can see it from my house.
it could be the very top of that break's going to be around 850 feet. These are the same size shells that you would see in New York City, Macy's. It's the larger shells. Professional shells start at 2 inches. And well, then they go all the way up. And I would say in the course of mainstream shows, even the very, very large shows you see in Washington and in New York, the majority of shells shot being at those shows are 4, 5, and 6-inch shells. 8-inch shells, 10-inch shells are very expensive. They're not shot very often. And they require very large separation radiuses. So most of the shells that you're going to see in very large shows are 4 and 5 and 6-inch shells, and we're permitting those one for 4s and 5s and 3s. 3-inch shells will be used in the finale, and 4 and 5-inch shells will be used to make up the body. Everybody on the island will be able to see the show. These are not small shells.
I would say Litchfield could see it, Debbie Do could see it.
I'm saying you could walk on Highway 17 and see with no problem.
Probably.
And also, just to let you know, depending what happens with the police department, if we or you feel that we need to hire additional police, I am fine to pay that. I don't want to put additional burden on Mike and his staff. So if you feel that you think parking is going to be an issue, or that you need somebody part-time, please know that I'm okay. I don't want the town to incur that expense.
I'm sure there'll be an influx of people who are gonna wanna come down here
And I'm not,
need some direction.
I'm not really doing, I'm not doing planning because I don't know if this is gonna happen or not. But if it does, I'm not gonna do a really big marketing for this. This is primarily for owners on the island as a thank you to our guests and our homeowners. I appreciate the people of Litchfield and Hagley, and that's fine, but that's not why I'm doing it. All I want is Pawleys Island really recognize my gratitude to our owners. So if they come over, it's gonna be by word of mouth.
Once it's on Facebook, you can't get it back.
Yeah, but just to let you know, I'm not gonna do this huge billboard, and I'm not doing it, it's all about me. It's not all about Pawleys Island, really. We're paying for it, we're paying all the expenses, but I wanna be cognizant of what this will bring on to the town.
It would only be a couple hours for guys to be
Right.
around, so yeah.
I don't have that much money. I know how much it costs a minute.
Question on that.
It's hard to.
Rocky, you got any questions or input?
This seems like something we really should just sort of, got a lot of information. Maybe we need to take it under consideration and kind of
I agree with that.
address it in the next council meeting.
When does the permitting have to be in by?
Say again.
Do we know when the permitting has to be in by?
How much advance notice would you, as far as your time frame, Ren? I think, which is why we tried to do this earlier rather than later, to make sure everybody's comfortable with the decision and the process. And if you need, Brent, if we need to show them on the map, maybe you could shoot me an email the next day or two, and I can pass it on to Ryan to the town so they know a little bit more definitive where we're talking, if they feel more comfortable.
Absolutely. I will send a map over. And the answer to the permitting question is given the fact that we're shooting from water, the U.S. Coast Guard, it requires a 135-day notice. That's if you're in a waterway in which ships are within. We're not. So we're going to be able to bump that down to 60 days. So we would need at least 2 months in order to get this show permitted because it's being shot from a barge. We weren't being shot from a barge, probably 2 weeks, but the barge makes things a bit different because DNR has to be notified, Coast Guard has to be notified, and those things require time, 2 months.
Maybe we could be on the agenda next month as well.
We can do that. We can do that.
Okay, and then we also shoot fireworks for the Isle of Palms and Sullivan's Island. Both of those towns deal with quite a bit of traffic. Now that's July 4th shows. So they have, I think it's around 100,000 people coming to the islands for those. So if there's any questions around traffic control or how they do it, I have two different contacts I work with there. They would be able to share information. But I think with this not being advertised and being kept low key, you shouldn't have those type of traffic issues that they have on those islands. I think I think if you don't advertise it, then you shouldn't have that. I mean, we do private displays all the time, and we do them for towns as well. And when it's not July 4th and they're not advertised well, I mean, there's a few people who come out, but there's not a lot. So I think not advertising it will not cause a ton of traffic issues there on Pawleys Island.
All right. I'd like to go ahead and move on unless there's any more comments or questions about this item. I've got two comments on this. One is, Pawleys Island, this estuary is a very small venue. It's a small estuary. The ones you referenced, Sullivan's Island, Port Royal, Beaufort, those are pretty wide open, large spaces. I'm concerned about the trash, the debris, fire hazard. Traffic obviously is a whole nother matter here. We have a hard enough time with some of the Easter events and the Christmas parade parking that we had, and this is probably going to be tenfold more people than that. And number two, I'll just say that, the town, we're not really in the business of permitting spectacles to benefit a single local business. I mean, something we'll certainly consider, but I just wanted to put that out there. That's some of the things that we're going to consider over the next month before we meet on February 14th.
Okay, well, I understand that. I would just share that, when I think the debris, the consideration is going to be very small. We shoot a lot of shows. So when we're talking about debris, guys, I want y'all to keep in mind, we're not talking about a lot of debris here. And I do understand that it's a different venue, but we have a lot of open space there. I can assure you, this is not a close proximity show. It's nowhere near it. We have ample distance to shoot fireworks. And it will be an event that the entire town will benefit from. They just will. It'll be a lot of fun. We are going to be shooting these fireworks. They will be computer controlled. They will be Disney style in nature. So you're going to have a very, very nice display there. And I think everyone in the town will greatly appreciate it.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Brad.
Yes, thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and move on unless anybody has any other questions or thoughts. Thank you, Betsy, for coming in and taking us through that. Let's go to item 4A, which is coastal science and engineering. We had been talking about over the last several months pursuing some type of a creek dredging initiative. The last one was done a number of years ago. We understand that it's an effort and an ordeal to obtain the permitting necessary to do creek dredging. Two parts of this. One is a study to figure out where best to address creek dredging. And number two is what's the cost associated with not only the study, but the effort to do that creek dredging. So Stephen is here to give us a kind of an overview, and we can certainly ask some questions. Appreciate you being here and appreciate all the work you did with the beach renourishment too.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I got Dr. Patrick Barrett here with me to discuss potential funding and things like that. And was happy to pop out of the beach a little while ago, and I'm very happy with the way the beach looks. The fact that the groins are still pretty much buried along the south end, I think, is a very good sign for the total performance of the project. We haven't had any huge storms, but we've had some significant, winter type storms and nor'easters that have, been pretty energetic. So I feel like the beach is holding up pretty well for 2 years in now. With the creek dredging proposal that we put together, the creek dredging, on one hand, it's a fairly simple idea. It's done all of the time. People dredge marinas and creeks and things like that to improve access. But the fact that it hasn't been done here on a regular interval, that you do have a significant marsh system that, as you just mentioned, you're kind of protective of. A lot of people aren't. So it's going to raise a lot of environmental questions. So the way we have approached this proposal is not to provide a proposal to submit a full permit application, because honestly, we don't know well, first, we're not sure the scope that the town is really looking for. Are there specific places in the creek that you're looking to dredge? Are we looking to dredge the entire thing from north to the south side? So we need a little bit of feedback from the town, those kind of discussions, to see, well, okay, what are our areas of concern? What are we trying to achieve? Are we, really looking for open navigation? Are we looking just to kind of clean things out? So part of it is, again, identifying the scope that we're trying to permit. And making sure.
Let me ask you this, as part of, I guess, part of the study that we would be looking for, it's information on determining where best to dredge. Because I mean,
So
the only way to really understand it is, I mean, if you kayak in the water a lot, you kind of have you have a good feel for it, but you almost have to take a holistic view above and know exactly where the flows are, time lapse photography, whatever, to be able to get a good feel for that, and lower tides, right? I mean, we talk about the extremely high tides, but what are the lower tides, and get some studies done at that time as well. So those are the kind of things that we're looking to get assistance with.
right. So, and that's part of our other scope. So we have the initial kind of, okay, make sure everybody's on the same page on what are our end goals, and then what are the existing conditions. So that's we're looking at photography, and we're not just looking at the depth of the creek everywhere. We're looking at the marsh area beside it, because the first question that's going to be asked is, well, how are you impacting the marsh? So what are the existing depths, and then what are the sediments in the creek? Because that's really going to be the biggest driver of how this project would move forward. Is you have all this material in the creek. Some of it may be great sand that you can put out on the beach. Some of it may be fluff mud that can't be put on the beach. There may be some intermediate that's sand mixed with mud, and maybe there's some creative things we can do with that to both save money and to reduce some of the environmental concerns. Because it's very expensive to pump bad material onto the land, dry it out, and then haul it off. So we need to do some type of inventory of what's the existing conditions, from spatially, how much volume are we talking about? What are the existing depths, and what are the sediments? And that will help guide us in knowing to approach the agencies and say, okay, we have X number of yards that need to be dredged. We have the potential to place that material. Hopefully some can go on the beach because it's cheap and it helps the beach. But if not, where are we going to dispose of the other material? Is there somewhere to do that?
Hey, Stephen, can you hear me?
Yes, right.
Quick question for you. In terms of the permitting agencies involved, do they have any perspective that increasing the tide flow in a tidal area, a marsh area like the creek, is a good thing? Or do they automatically assume a negative?
I don't think that they automatically assume really one way or the other. They really look to the applicant to tell them what we think the project would do. I don't think there's necessarily a net environmental benefit to dredging the creek. I don't think we're really looking at increasing water quality here or anything like that too much. But it may be more important to identify any areas of concern that the project may have negative impacts. So we want to look at if we dredge out one portion, is it going to cause some potential loss of marsh in another area? I'm not really too concerned about increasing flows because you're not increasing the tidal prism. We're not affecting the inlets really. We're really looking at the backside, and maybe we would. I don't. Those are maybe later discussions, but there's not really the potential to increase the currents very much because we're not affecting the inlets or the overall tidal prism.
Are you saying the inlets wouldn't be dredged?
Well, that's something we will need to discuss. Is that part of the scope? Are we looking at actually trying to get boats out of the inlet at low tide? Because that's a more significant project and would have different environmental concerns because shorebirds use the inlet shorelines and things like that.
What did they do at Captain Sam's Inlet? Didn't they cut a hole and create a man-made inlet?
Right, so that one, we cut a new channel through the spit about 3,000 feet north of where the existing channel was. And we built a sand pipe across the whole channel. And that was a migratory inlet, much like Pawleys, just a much bigger scale. So we just shifted that natural progression back to the north, and it's shifting.
Does that increase the flow? You did that?
No, it can, again, an inlet sand, it's going to eventually, there's a relationship between the size of an inlet and the size of the lagoon behind it. So the bigger the lagoon behind it, the bigger the inlet will be. So when we initially built it, the inlet that we built was too small because it's the efficient way to build it, but we leave it up to nature to widen it out over time. So it's going to approach an equilibrium over time. So it really doesn't, you can do things that are going to have some temporary impact, but long term, it's going to kind of do what it wants to do. Now, if we filled in the entire marsh so it didn't flood as much and didn't hold as much water, then that would shrink the size of the unit.
Well, I've heard people forever say that the creek started silting in when they put the causeways across because the water couldn't flow back and forth through. Do you think that's true?
What generally happens, and that's something you'd have to look at a kind of a detailed field study, looking at water levels and flows throughout the creek. But what happens when you have a convergence, in which you would have at some point here, is you have tides coming in from the north side and the south side, and they meet in the middle at some point. And that shifts with weather and tide range and things. But wherever that tide meets, the current stops and sediment falls out. And so the center of these islands tend to fill in to a large point. Edisto had the same thing. And DNR actually did a study, and I was involved with it in grad school, about looking at taking out the causeway at Edisto. And after the study basically said, well, if you take it out, it's basically going to be a natural convergence anyway. You're not really going to be impacting the flow one way or the other. I'm not saying that's the exact situation here, but you have the bridges. So as long as some of the flow is going, I don't think it's going to be too much of a change.
Well, no, I guess my question is, it seems like a lot of money to find out if there's something we can afford to do, and we don't know what the price might be when it's all said and done. And I can't imagine you could give us a price without knowing what we want to do.
Right. And that's why we try not to give you a proposal for all the permit at this point. But anything that we do here leads directly into that next permitting phase. You wouldn't have to redo it. This is kind of the initial site assessment, and it's probably half of the initial coordination that we would need to do with the agencies to see, okay, here's our general scope. We would have an interagency meeting to say, this is what we're thinking. Now give us some feedback. And then all that would be incorporated into a permit to move forward. So it's not and I was looking at the proposal again, and I had the same thought you did, is that, that it's more than we would want to do for just an initial feasibility study, but really to assess this large of an area with the creek and the sediment sampling, which really drives what the potential costs would be. It's a kind of all necessary work.
And so I had somebody tell me at Prince George that the last time they dredged the creek, that it affected them because the inlet moves south. Do you think that's true?
It's certainly possible when you're working right at that inlet, and I've met with those Prince George folks about the inlet. My recommendation to them would be to do a very similar inlet relocation project here, is shift that inlet further up towards Pawleys. That serves a couple of purposes. One, it kind of helps back sand up towards Pawleys a little bit. As the inlet stretches further south, it tends to take the trapping capacity of the inlet further south as well, which means it makes the southern end of Pawleys a little more vulnerable. So should there be another major storm, like we had in Hugo, there's more of a potential for a breach or something like that. Now the spit's much healthier right now than it was a couple of years ago from the nourishment. But it also, by shifting it north, it would help sand flow and kind of restore that area of Prince George.
How far north would you have to shift it? Approximately.
South, obviously south of the parking area. You'd want to get it far enough south from the parking area that you're not likely to cause any changes to that. So I would say probably somewhere middle between where it's at now and that parking area.
And how would that benefit Pawleys if you did that?
Again, you're now shifting that the delta kind of acts like a natural groin. It builds sand out, and that kind of helps back up sand for certain distances north of the groin or north of the inlet. So by shifting it further towards Pawleys, it's kind of helping back up sand, more around the parking area and the south end. Again, as it goes further and further south, it's kind of wanting to draw sand further south. So it may leave it a little more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Rocky, you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask Stephen, I'm assuming your proposal in putting that together, you had to assume that we were looking at the entire creek because we didn't tell you otherwise. If we were to narrow that down to some problem areas, how would that impact your pricing?
I'd have to kind of go back and look again to the field data collection was assuming that we were, taking aerial imagery of the entire system. That doesn't change a whole lot because it's a kind of a one-time effort. The environmental review part with the interagency discussions and determining discussion, it may come down a little bit, but I think most of the questions are still the same. If we're looking at any significant area of the creek, inland of the inlet, that's kind of one project that it's all kind of the same questions and concerns. We have to, again, identify the sediments. So there may be some modest reduction in it, but we really
Nothing
need to
significant.
on that step.
When you, at the end of the day, when you have to come up with a cost and you're going from one end to the other, which is what you assume there, is it a project that's costs more than the beach renourishment, half the beach renourishment, or a fraction of it, or more?
I would think a fraction, half at the high end. We haven't done a lot of it would be a pretty large scale project to do the entire creek. But once, again, just like a offshore project, once the equipment's here, you want to take advantage of it. So
Doesn't it feel like to you guys, gals, that, if you start talking about dredging in the interior of the island, it's mostly pluff mud and things of that nature. When you get towards the inlets, it seems a lot more sandy consistency and all of that. And it's not to say we're making a decision now, but it just feels like to me that most of the interaction that I get and people that call me and sound off about creek dredging and problem areas, the south end kind of down there near where you are seems to bubble up to the top more than anything, but also the north end seems similar. But it seems like to me, we don't have the money or the resources to dredge the entire creek. We're not talking about that because I think there's some environmental concerns once you get past so far south from the north end and so far north from the south end. We probably kind of need to leave that alone. That's just my general sense or feel. Maybe y'all disagree. But if we could target the north end and the south end as a sort of an initial foray into this, I think that makes sense. Do y'all agree or disagree with that?
I think when we did it before, we had spot dredging that did take care of some of the pluff mud. I mean, I know that, like north of the North Causeway, that sandy island essentially built up, and the same thing on the curve there at the south end. But I think we had to remove quite a bit of pluff mud in an effort to keep it healthy, as they said. But it was only spot dredging.
Yeah.
And that's probably, that was all we could get permitted for. It wasn't a total, let's rip this sucker out and start over.
yeah, and I can imagine something like that would be kind of the end result. Again, part of this would look at the scale of what would it cost you to do the whole thing? What would it cost you to do these focus areas? And what's the difference between dredging mud and dredging the sand?
Yep.
You have the two different environmental considerations. One, as you get further into the pluff mud, you're within a vegetated marsh area.
Estuaries,
throw a flag.
fishing, yeah.
As you get close to the inlets, you're at an inlet. That's going to throw up flags for shorebirds. Again, none of those are things that can't be overcome. It's just there's going to be these environmental considerations that we're going to have to negotiate with resource agencies and NGOs and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Got it.
Let me ask this question, two questions, really. First, if you went to the north end inlet and Litchfield didn't do anything, is that sand that Litchfield not just going to fill in the hole that we created behind Pawleys Island?
Anytime you dig out sand, it's going to eventually fill back in.
Yeah.
None of this is permanent.
All right, the next question is, I've noticed that particularly up there's a lot more sand in the creek and now on the south end as well. And just as a novice, had to think that was we had about 5 years in a row, and at least 2 on the south end down here, and north end down here, and south end down here. The water breached the island and it seemed like it pushed all that sand, what little dunes we had on the south end, it pushed it into the creek, and the same thing up here. Is that what we're seeing? Why the creek is lower is because of a series of storms that pushed the sand into the creek?
I think there's some of that. We looked at some of the imagery after the storm. You could see some relatively small deposits that you could tell definitely came from the road. I don't think that's the principal cause of infilling. I think it's just part of the natural evolution progression. But it's it's a maintenance thing. If you want to have deep water in the coast, eventually you're gonna have to dredge it.
Just kayak a couple of water at low tide. Would be good. At the south end and north end.
Just get a little dredges on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Little dredges on the.
And I just, not to belabor the point, but if you spend some time on the ends of the island and do a fair job of making the waters flow a little better, just kind of get in and out, it may help the middle of the island with some of the issues we have. I just, again, the middle of the island, with my John boat, paddleboard a fair amount in there. The middle of the island, to me, doesn't seem, I don't know of any areas off the top of my head that are problematic right now. In front of your house? Well, there's by the, that little island by the Cooper's old house.
Kids were little, you have a big
Yeah.
fish by the sandbar, it's solid sand.
Yeah, there is a lot of sand. You're right, there is a lot of sand right there. But my point there is if we address the ends and we make it a manageable effort, it could help that scenario. No, yes, I mean, if you increase the flow or.
Again, I don't think anything we're doing would be increasing the flow too much. Now, you do have losses in velocity due to friction if you have shallow water. So if you do have some more channelized flow, there's potential for some increased velocity. But I think by the time you get to the middle, it's going to be minimal change.
Yeah, or maybe it's distance the water flows as opposed to velocity. You know what I mean? Because if it's water struggling to get in and out every tide, but it has an easier time getting in,
and
that's going to move.
If you did open up, one thing that is if there's a natural sill, so if you come in the inlet and then there's just kind of a sill, kind of like a small dam of sand. So if the south end completely across the creek, it never gets below 2 feet, then you're only going to have minimum flow. It's only going to flow once it gets above that sill. So we do see that sometimes in the interior marshes. So if you're not down that sill, then that does open up your tidal range.
Got it.
We're not really looking at doing our study would tell us that kind of thing. We're not looking at doing a detailed flow analysis of the whole thing. That would be fairly time consuming.
Stephen, you guys obviously do a good bit of the beach renourishments and we've seen your expertise and ability there. Do you guys do a lot of creek dredging projects, initiatives? When's the last time you've done one? Where was it?
We did Pawleys Beaches County Park. We dredged out of the creek there. That was about 400,000 yards. So it was actually a big project, but it was a pretty small portion of the creek.
400,000 yards.
Yeah.
And we did 1 point what? Oh, that
right
one.
around $1 million.
Yeah, we did. Never mind.
So where was
I
that?
just said that.
At Pawleys Beach County Park. That was in 2013.
Got it.
But we haven't done a lot of these interior, like long creek things.
That's a lot of material though.
And I'll just chime in on that. I mean, part of it, the issue there is that there's not a lot of these projects, period, in the state. And so whenever you talk to the regulators, there's always questions that come up that are difficult to foresee.
Yeah.
It's not like nourishment.
Do you think that's because it's too difficult to get permits?
I mentioned this to them. It's not the state or the Corps that's going to be an issue. It's getting
All
the
the hearings.
environmental agencies and the NGOs.
I mean, because it took us like 7 years last time to get a permit, right? Wasn't it like 7 years, Ryan, to get a permit to dredge the creek last time?
If I remember
It was
correctly.
before he got here. We had
My time.
It was in Mike Adams,
Yeah. Yeah.
it took him a long time to get that.
This is a tough question to ask, but if we dotted all of our i's and crossed all of our t's and we got feedback and we marched as fast as we could, give us the most optimistic timetable for permitting to, let's just say we wanted to do both ends of the island.
I'd say
Being optimistic,
18 months
Really?
at the most optimistic.
okay? And
That's without,
How about the realistic?
again, if you can, the biggest thing about anything like this is trying to be upfront with the agency. Plan, say, look, we evaluate this. Here's our monitoring plan to make sure that the marsh, if there is any loss over the next 2 or 3 years, we can mitigate that. But getting them in on the front end of it, so that you don't get a permit and then have it appealed. And that's why we go up to the interagency meeting in this proposal is that's the point where we're having this feedback with them so that when we go to them with the permit application, all that stuff can work out.
Okay. The one thing I would say, we probably need to move on, unless you guys have anything
Definitely.
pressing. The first thing we've got to do, I believe, maybe y'all disagree, we got to figure out, do we need to and why? Is it because, oh, I can't kayak, certain times of the tide, or my John boat runs aground? Is it that? Is it recreation, or is it health of the creek? I mean, one of the things we talked about in strategic planning almost 2 years ago, sorry, I mean, my back turn to you, is, or do we really need to do this and why? And I think that's what we're going to look to you guys. There's been a lot of people will voice their concerns. Hey, we need to dredge the creek. We need to dredge the creek. It's a major effort. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of energy. Do we need to? And if we do, is it because we want to be able to kayak in more places or paddleboard? And if that's legitimate and fair, then fine, let's pursue it. If it's going to do damage to the creek and there's some risks and challenges, maybe not. But the overall health of the creek is the thing we want more than anything, right? I mean, I love in the summertime to look out there and it's beautiful, vibrant green marsh grass. I mean, it's phenomenal. And that's a big part of what Pawleys Island is the marsh, right? So we got to protect that. That's first and foremost. So that's what we'd be looking to CSC to tell us, hey, y'all are thinking about creek dredging. We could do it, and here's where it had the most impact, but you probably don't need to do it right now. You do need to do it right now, and here's why. Agree? I mean, do you have?
Yeah, one of my other thoughts with this is if creek dredging was priority for whatever reason, what can we do to maximize your efficiencies on costs? Can we put any sand out on the beach because it's cheaper and it's better for the beach? System just keep the sand here. But are there some other things we could do to potentially help some of these flooding issues? One of you mentioned the backside of the island earlier. That's something that's going to have to be addressed. And one of the things that's done like in Louisiana and it's been proposed in some other areas is doing like thin layer disposal in the marsh.
Say that again.
Thin layer disposal. Okay. And sometimes that raises a red flag. Sometimes people are like, it's the greatest thing ever. But it's the idea of, okay, so if there is fluff mud in the creek that we need to move, are there places that we could pump out, thin layers in the marsh so you're not killing the marsh, but the marsh grows through that and you're actually raising the elevation to kind of keep pace with sea level rise. So I've always kind of had Pawleys in the back of my mind as it's kind of an ideal spot to do some of these.
She would do that near where you dredge the.
It would be, we would identify the areas that are kind of most vulnerable that also worked out logistically. And this might get completely shot down by the agencies because sometimes
Worth a shot.
it's just they're not ready for that yet. But it's going to have to be something that they look at in the future. So if it's a way that you can dispose of some of this material while also benefiting something else, that's something we can look at. And that I would like to approach. I'm actually having some meetings later this week with some folks to talk about these kind of things.
Stephen, you're very familiar with most of the resort beach, small communities up and down the coast, North Carolina, all the way down through, right down to Savannah. And do you know of any other communities, small communities like this one that floods as severely as we do? I mean, do you feel like we're on a scale of 1 to 10, we're a 9 or an 8 or compared to other?
You're definitely up there. The backside of Edisto, the dockside, Big Bay Creek area, they're not quite as bad as Yara, but they get water up their road.
Would you qualify or say that our situation is?
I can talk about that.
Please. I know we're getting a little off topic and I don't want to say too much, but I think this is important. What time you got to leave?
6:15.
Okay.
We'll get as much in as we can.
Yeah, Patrick has been doing a good job for us keeping track of like trends in sea level changes and a lot of these types of things and weather impacts. So he's been really focusing on that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. The south end of Pawleys, south of the Bird's Nest, is pretty exceptionally vulnerable to hazard flooding based on tides alone, not runoff. There are other places like Stephen mentioned, like on Edisto, a few spots in Cherry Grove, up at the Outer Banks, but that's a different issue because they get big waves, so it's slightly different. But yeah, the south end of Pawleys is very vulnerable to nuisance flooding, and not even
the north.
Well, exactly, and past past either causeway is a very high vulnerability.
The middle of the island gets not as much, but it gets its fair share around the chapel and.
It does, yeah.
And towards the bird's nest, as you approach the bird's nest, it's like a good bit.
It's definitely the worst in the state.
It's, yeah, if it's not the worst, it's on the short list.
Charleston will be on the list too. Beaufort and all these other
Yeah.
places that have roads that flood periodically.
Yeah, and that's what, again, I know you need to move on, but we're actually kind of tracking, it's going to be the inland that's going to be the most visible flooding issues. The beach, it moves every day with the tides.
Sure.
You put sand out there, it rises. It's complicated and expensive, but it's easy to fix. It's these roads and low-lying causeways and things like that.
Last 60 seconds, I'm going to actually move the agenda around a little bit because there's a few things we have to vote on. So I'm going to move those ahead of some of the other items. But I've noticed over the last few months, the last few weeks in particular, going out to the beach, it looks like it's looking more and more like a natural, evolved, not manufactured beach. Is that the opinion that you guys are going out there? I mean, I saw an invoice from you, also I know you're looking at it.
Yeah,
Is that your sense for
I
it?
tell everybody, you have to have 2 or 3 years after nourishment
Yeah.
before it'll start looking natural.
Yeah.
Even without.
The slope and everything, and a lot of the shells, hard shells are kind of more buried.
If we could get that-
Seems like to me, maybe. Yeah,
But
yeah, well, it's coming.
Mr. Mayor, if I just can ask a question.
Sure, please.
So these drawings are starting to become exposed, and I'm really kind of concerned, especially at high tide, of danger of somebody swimming into them, getting brushed up against them, diving, breaking, injuring themselves. Is there some way we can put some sort of buoy or warning device out there other than those signs that we have are closer to the dune line?
yeah, that's something we discussed during the project, but there's 2 approaches to being able to do that. As the groins become more exposed, they do become a hazard because if it's high tide, you don't know they're there.
Right.
So somebody can go jump in the water thinking it's water and there'd be a rock there. So what we did at Hunting Island State Park is we just took round wooden piles, about 10-inch piles, and drove them vertically right at the end of the groin. So you could see them at all tides. You see that wooden post sticking out, and I think they put a sign that said, caution rock, small skinny sign that doesn't get hit by waves. It's a pretty visible thing. So when you look at the beach, you would see these. It's not awful, but it's, you do see them, which again is good because you see it. Because if you put a sign up at the dune and somebody's out, walking the tide line, they're not going to see the sign. So that's probably the high-end, permanent, most visible, protective option. The other option is just having a cheap sign that is quick to install, that you just place at each groin, closer to the water line. And if it does get washed out or moved for whatever reason, it takes a couple minutes to go put it back. And it's closer to the water line so people see it.
Attached to what?
Just driven into the sand.
Okay, but not a 10-inch round.
Right.
Okay.
So that's kind of your low cost, a little less visible.
But more maintenance because they get
More maintenance, because if you do have a big tide or something that might knock it down, you can go back and pick it up. We've tried buoys, they don't hold up well unless you have a really large buoy, because if you have a big storm, it'll just pull a small anchoring system out or damage the buoy.
Stephen, I hate to do it, but I gotta end it there. Sarah said she's got a commitment at 6:15, so we've got about 12 minutes. After that, we can no longer meet because we want a forum. So thank you for that. Appreciate both of you coming in.
Rocky considered part of the forum?
No, we have to have 3 present in person to have a quorum. So what I'd like to do is there's some informational items on here. I'm going to skip those for now. I'm also going to move down to item 5D, which if we do nothing else tonight, that's probably the most pressing other than the payments to CSE and Pelzer and Belzer. So I'd like to jump to item 5D, if it pleases the council. It's the first reading of ordinance 2022-01. First ordinance of the year, an ordinance amending the 2022 annual budget. I'll let Ryan give us a quick overview of that, and then we can, and again, this is the first reading. Second reading is when we will.
This is this amendment just takes into account the decision to eliminate the police department by one full-time position. So these are the budget amendment line item by line item that is necessary to make that happen. This also keeps in mind that the one position that we are eliminating is a position currently held by an officer that is retiring at the end of March. So this is not fully eliminating it for the entire year. It's eliminating it once that officer retires at the end of March.
Okay.
That is everything that this amendment is, in addition to reducing the merit increase, or the cost of living increase from 5.9 down to 4.5. And that's in the salary line item, and it accounts for about $2,000.
What questions you guys have about the amendment to the budget? Again, this is the first reading. The final approval will be next month in the second reading. Need a vote to pass the first reading or motion or discussion.
So I mean, I had a question. So Ryan, when we talked about this, you and Rocky months ago, you thought it'd be like $100,000 plus savings. And I read in the paper it's only $50,000. I'm a little confused how it went from 100 plus to right at 50.
I don't recall the conversation where numbers of $100,000 were.
Well, it's also in this document that you presented.
It is, and it's the same information you had before you had final reading of the budget, so it's not.
So that one was over, maybe, is it because you're including the vehicle in it when you count the 100?
Correct, the vehicle was $47,000, if you eliminate the $47,000 for the vehicle, plus this. That's about $100,000.
Let me address it this way, Gary, because I understand what you're saying. The first reading, just like we're having now, the first reading for the amendment, the first reading of the 2022 budget, the police budget was $523,000. This proposed amendment to the budget reduces that $416,800. That's a $106,000 reduction.
Well, that's what confused me was the $50,000 quote.
That's what it is, though. It's $106,000 for 2022. It will be probably more than that in 2023 because it'll be a full year of 3 full-time equivalents. Okay. What other questions or motions?
Do we need to vote on the first reading? I'm sorry.
I think we do.
You do.
Yeah, we need to pass the first reading.
So I'll make a motion to approve the first reading.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second on approval of the ordinance 2022-01. Do we have any further discussion on it?
I'd like to note one other additional item.
Sure.
Is there's no money in this budget for doing another storm drain pilot program.
Okay.
$35,000. So this would be a time that you could add that in, or you could think about it and add it in before second reading.
So there's $0 in it for storm.
Correct.
Was it $35,000 total or $35,000 after the neighbors helped pay half of it?
$35,000 is what was budgeted and put in last year. So, and that's about what it came in at.
Yeah.
So that's the best number we have to work with. So it'd be $35,000 is what you put in as a placeholder for this, and whatever you end up generating through donations, we could, certainly offset that. But
I think it's wise that you've stepped in and said that, because if we're going to do the bird's nest area, why don't we just put another $35,000 placeholder in for that? We may not spend it, we may not do it, but I think it's good to have a placeholder in there. Rocky, you agree?
Yeah, I actually thought we had already done that, so I'm good with it.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we probably need a motion to do that. Amend the original motion to include.
Or should that be two separate motions?
two separate, a motion to amend this ordinance.
Correct.
Including the $35,000 for storm drain pilot program, and then you vote to approve it as amended.
Correct.
And then do this part separate? Or is it all one?
It's all one.
You would amend
So
the motion.
I
Make a motion to amend.
I'll make the motion to amend, to add the $35,000 under the same program we had last time.
Drainage project.
And I'll second that.
Okay, we have to vote on that motion first. So any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, now we need to, any more discussion on the amended motion, which is to approve the ordinance with that amendment? No other discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right. I think if you can give us 5 more minutes before you go, we can do these pretty quickly, I think. Appointments to boards, item 5B. And I'll go back, sorry, actually, let's go to item 4D1, which is approved payment to CSC for $8,050.
I'll make the motion.
We have a
And I'll
motion,
second.
we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have a approved payment to Belzer and Belzer for $4,967.35.
I'll make the motion.
I have just a quick question. I will second it, but I'd like a question before we vote.
Yep, we can have discussion after the second.
All right, I'll second.
Go ahead.
So Ryan, is that their last invoice for them? Or are they still doing some things for us?
No, I mean, they're still working on, I mean, Mr. Stanton is going to appeal that. So it's not a done deal by any stretch. So he's still working on that. And then even once that is all completed, there's still the having to still continue to seek those easements. Once this is all said and done, that's the deal with the Army Corps. Everything is contingent upon the idea that the town will continue to pursue those easements. So right now, we're just still trying to get past this whole what is owed in legal fees to the 3 parties, which was determined, but all 3 have appealed that total. So that's where we're at now. So they're still working on it.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, item 5B, appointments to boards, commissions, and committees. Reappoint Sassy Henry to Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee for a 2-year term expiring February 10th, 2024.
I'll make the motion.
And I'll second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Item 5B, item 2, reappoint Robert Levine to Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee for a 2-year term expiring February 10th, 2024.
I'll make the motion.
And I'll second.
Have a motion, second, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed. We have item 5C, approved MOA with Georgetown County Chamber of Commerce as the town's designated tourism marketing organization. Is this MOA any different than what we did last year?
No, same one we've used the last 6 years or 5 years.
Okay. This is pretty much same old business. With the chamber.
Absolutely, word for word.
Okay.
Nothing changed at the date.
What questions y'all have about it? Motion?
I'll make the motion.
And I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed. All right, Sarah, it is 6:13. So now you need to go. I think we've covered everything. We have not gone through the financial report, the police report, or the building report. Mike, is there anything crazy or out of line? Thank you. Building report.
One new house on there.
Does that one go through the ARB?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Financial report is in your packets. Does anybody have any questions about what was presented? I only have one. I can find it. If I can read it. Public Works and Buildings, those 2 main line items. Sorry, that's okay. We're over what we budgeted. I just couldn't remember what those were.
So public work was mostly trash pickup. Trash pickup. Access. And we spent a little bit more in, supplies, namely like dog trash bags and
Okay,
trash bags for the actual pickup at beach accesses.
okay. So that's mainly what those were, because everything else was either 94, 96, 100, 86% below what we budget on the expense side, and then the revenue side was 144% on local, 144%, which is really good.
Yeah,
Really good.
and then the buildings was over, and that was, we had a water line break at the Old Town Hall, and that had to be repaired. That was like around $2,000, I believe. That was early in the year. So that's what I would like to go over.
All right, let's, for the sake of time, find my agenda. I think we've covered everything on the agenda. Last bit is comments by council.
Since I have 1 minute left, I'd like to make one comment if I could. There's some recent news articles, and I think perhaps some discussion about this action that we've taken to cut our budget with regard to the police. And just some clarifications, I think, about that reporting and other comments that have been made. As you said earlier, Brian, it's not a $50,000 saving, it's a $100,000 savings on the budget that was presented to us originally. And while that certainly no one is saying that is sufficient to pay for all the capital needs we have in the coming years, it's also not a drop in the bucket. And we saved money for 20 years for this last beach renourishment, almost. 20 years of $100,000 is not insignificant money. And so, you know, to say that we shouldn't do it just because it's not enough to pay for our capital is kind of, to me, it's the same thing as telling a young person, oh, don't start saving your money because you don't have a whole lot right now, so don't worry about it. You know, it's not really the way to think about budgets nor fiscal responsibility, in my opinion. And then lastly, when we look at, there was one comment, well, you're just going to use the county for that police service, so you're not really saving anything in total. Well, the reality is that our property owners on the island are already paying for that sheriff service. We pay that through our property taxes, just like the people of Litchfield, just like the people all over the Waccamaw Neck. So there's no different. We are paying for that service. We're going to be asking for a bit more of it, not full time. We still have our police service here that's going to be quite sufficient, I think, and significant. The police presence that we'll still have on the island. So, you know, I think there's just perhaps some misunderstandings, misinterpretations, and I wanted to just offer some clarification.
I appreciate that, Rocky. Appreciate that. That's right on. All right, anybody else comments?
I would echo what Rocky is saying. I think it'd be like telling a parent who just had a child, you don't need to start saving for your child's education. It's going to take place 25 years from now or 20 years from now. You start saving now for the future. And so I think that's what's going on here. And it's not insignificant. You talk to any financial planner, they'll tell you at a young age, the amount of money you save when you're young in anticipation of something 40 and 30 years later is what builds up and what makes a difference. So I echo what you said, Rocky.
Thank you.
Barry, have anything? All right. Motion for adjournment.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
And I'll second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank y'all very much. I had some, but wait till